Since it dealt with anaphylactic shock, I'm going to start when it occurred. However, when I talk about this is not me saying don't get the vaccine. Okay, I'm not a non-vacciner. Okay, this is a political thing. I am allergic and have been allergic to the flu vaccine. So, in the position that I was working, I had to go get the flu vaccine in November of 2018. And within 1 week after getting it, both eyes had dilated and they stayed dilated. And I went to 3 different doctors, 2 ophthalmologists and 1 regular doctor, and no one could really figure out what had happened, except they kept telling me I touched a medication with my fingers. And I've been a nurse for 20 some odd years and have touched thousands of drugs with my fingers and have never had dilation of the eyes. And not only that, as a nurse, we go and wash our hands all the time. As soon as you touch a med, you go wash your hand. So that was not it. And my doctor knew that too. She knew that was a bunch of bull. Let's get to February the 8th, when when it occurred. As the dilation started, my body started swelling. I started feeling horrible. So I got home the next morning from working and I was sick. I mean, and my son was here and he made this fabulous gourmet meal, and I love gourmet food and I couldn't touch it. It just, and so that was about noon. And from noon until midnight is very blurry. I knew I was sick. I knew I needed to get to the emergency room, but I was too confused to get there. I remember the newsman at nighttime saying, "This is the coldest night of the year and don't go out on the roads because there's ice out there." And so I said to myself, well, you just picked a fine night to die. I think before I even finished that thought, I was standing and I don't even remember hitting the ground. I was gone. And so that was the evening of the 8th. Well, the next morning, my children told me I was on the phone talking to them, which is weird. Okay, I don't know how to put those pieces together, but they called EMS and they worked on me. My son told me they worked on me for an hour before they got me to the hospital. The hospital's 12 hours from the house. And they stopped, pulled over often to give me CPR. When I was in the hospital, and I don't know at the time when my NDE started, but I awakened in what I call pods. And I have a picture of it in the book that I just wrote. And in the book, I have them colored. But in reality, when I was there, they were not colored. They were very cloudy. They had a cloudy feeling to them. And so we each have our pod. And inside that pod, we do our creation. Okay. So that pod is actually our consciousness pod. And later we'll get into that pod being in the Akashic library, which at the time I did not know what the word Akashic meant. In that Akashic field is where we create everything that we know. Okay, we create our world. So I suppose if you were religious, you would create your world, what you believe and what you think. If you're like me, you might create your own world. My whole NDE was more, I call it scientific and mathematical, even though I saw incidences that were with beings. And so I woke up and I had gotten out of my pod and I had said out loud, "Hey, I'm awake now. I need to get out of here." And immediately something or someone came to me. I didn't see them. And they took me out of the pod and set me down. And when I sat down, where I stood up or whatever I was doing, I was immediately, and let me back up here. There is no time. I know you've heard that before, but in the pod, in our consciousness, in the afterlife, there is not a timeline. There's only a timeline here. So when I give you the events, it sounds like it's on a timeline, but in actuality, I don't know. I don't know what came first, second, or third. It's just that my brain put it together in this order because it makes sense, okay, to me. So I'm standing at these mountains, and there's volcanoes, and I'm alone, and all of a sudden I see blood pouring out of these volcanoes, and I'm like freaked out. I said, "Am I in hell?" And I looked over, and there's a very tall Asian man. He's got a hat on, and he's got a long stick. And I said, "Am I in hell?" And he says, "Do you think you are?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Is it?" He says, "No, you're at the cleansing pool." And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "Well, is that blood? Is that?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, does it hurt?" He said, "Did it?" And I said, "No." He says, "Well, every time you ascend," and he didn't say the word ascend, but every time you go up, you have to come and get cleansed. So each step of your way, you will come to get cleansed. And I said, "Okay, great." So with that, I was at the next scene. And again, I don't know if it's on the timeline. I'm standing in a desert, and I'm looking out into the desert, and it's not hot. There's no temperature, but the sand is very dry, and I am alone. And I look off into the distance, and I mean, there is a huge stone. I say it's about 18 feet high and really, really thick. And it's dark, and it's very matted looking. And from the distance, it rolls up to my feet. And I'm looking at it, I touch it, and it's just stone. It's just solid. And I look at it, I'm thinking, well, what does it mean? It has no writing on it. There's nothing on it. And all of a sudden, the 5 to 6 o'clock position on the stone opens up. And I look inside, and it's like inviting me, "Come on in." And so I painted, in my book, I painted a picture of it. So I walk into the 5 or 6 position, and this is where I meet the being that I'm with. And it was, "Hi, how are you?" There was no, we just knew each other. And I couldn't tell if the being was a male or female. And my daughter has said to me, Mom, that's your mother. And it actually, the being could be. I don't know. They don't identify themselves, but there is a common, "So good to see you" feeling. And so the being reaches down. We're in a desert again, and the being holds up sand in their hand, the dirt, and they let it slide through their hands, and then they hand me some, and I'm like looking at this dirt, and the dirt is so fascinating because it's got gold and silvers and minerals and irons and ores and all the beauties. I mean, there's bacteria and viruses, all sorts of things in this dirt. I'm just letting it sprinkle from my hands, and as I do that, I can see into a quantum existence of what's beneath our feet. Is just, I mean, we're living in a 3-dimensional world, and what's all around us is so many more dimensions. I mean, it's just layered upon layered upon layered, and just fascinating. And so from there, we proceeded to the Sumerian tablets, and I wanted to get to the Sumerian tablets because that meant more to me than any part of this journey, I believe. And I recognized that I had more than likely been there at the forming of those stones, and I knew they became so familiar to me, and I knew that I had been there. I knew that I had read those tablets, and they meant so much to me. And that was probably one of the most memorable parts of my journey that I remember. And so my guide said, come on, let's go. And we weren't in a hurry, but the guide was thrilled. Come on, there's a lot to see. You're going to love seeing this. And I said, okay. So we took off and we're still on Earth. And I can see my hair. I mean, we're like flying through the air and we're traveling by the speed of thought. And so we're going off and we fly to the pyramids and I see the pyramids and oh, it's just absolutely fabulous. And it's just, oh, this just means so much to me. This is just, oh, so real. And I was here during that time and wow. Anyway, from there we went down to Peru and we um, flew past Machu Picchu and then up towards the Mayan temples and Mexico into the temples there. And that also was very, very, very familiar. And that was just magnificent because I saw it in the original form, how it now, not how it is today, but how it was originally. And so the being says to me, come on, we've got to go. And I said, okay. So we took off, we left Earth. And the being said to me, are you ready? Are you prepared? I said, for what? And they said, just brace yourself. And so I don't know, okay. And so we entered into a huge spacecraft and it was around Orion's belt. And my guide was behind me a little bit. We walked into a room that had a long table that wasn't really physically seen, but there were lights coming up from underneath it, and nothing is physical there. And the being said to me, "Have a seat in the chair," and there was no chair, but I sat down, and suddenly I stood up because in walked 5 beings of alien or ET. And I was just, wow. And I was like a child. And I said, who are you? Our human DNA? And they going, yes, we are. And so they're 5. So I took it that the 5 meant they were over all human beings. I could be mistaken because they might only be my DNA, but initially I thought, oh, they're over everybody. And so there were 5 of them, and they were very serious. They were not necessarily friendly. The one on the end was the friendliest. Okay, there were 5. At the furthest end from me was a very tall white being, never gave me eye contact. They had books or something in their hand and they sat down. Being number 4, I never actually remembered. Number 3 was bluish in color. Seems to me that it had beak and real birdie kind of eyes. Number 2, I can't remember. And number 1 was a very small grayish man who had a mustache. He was the guy, he was the friendly one, the one who was polite. And he said, here, please have a seat and make yourself comfortable. And I did. And so I think this is where my review was. Now, I'm the type of person who, if it's scary or intimidating, I will blank it out, you know? And so this part of it is fairly blanked out. So I judge myself pretty harshly. And so if there was anything intimidating, I would, oh, I don't want to hear that. You know, it would be, I can't do that. So I let that go. And so it was, this part of it was finished. And I had the feeling they didn't like me, which when it was time to go, did not have that feeling anymore. At that point in time, I knew you're acceptable. I was taken to another craft, another spacecraft. There was, or part of that one. I can't remember if it was part of that one or another one, but they were all nestled together. And I walked in. There was a whole bunch of alien beings that were working at the flight deck, and they said to me, okay, I'm not for sure. I need to back up because when I was sitting in the room at my judgment, they handed me sheets of binary codes. And they said, read these for us. And I'm going, I don't read binary code. And they said, really? And I said, well, I don't. And they handed me the binary codes, and I must have read them. And at that point is when they said, okay, you're all right. You know, so we get up to the other spacecraft, and I said to them, they said, come on in here into this other room. And they turned on the computer system, and there you could see star charts of galaxies and the universes, and different things would pop up, and they would say, what's that? What's that? Tell us where that is. Where's that? How do you get there? What's the name of that? Well, in World War II, my father had been a navigator. As a child, he had taught me a great deal of this. And so I was able to answer these questions. And so at that point, these men took the papers that the binary codes were written on, and they took them and threw them at their feet and burned them. And they had such great fun doing that. I don't know why, but it was part of their pleasure. And so, okay. So they said to me, well, you're free to go. We're going to open up the back door, and you may go anywhere you want in this universe, because we know that you know where you're going. And I said, okay. They did send a youngish male with me. And the only communication we did was a nod, like, thank you for being here. And there wasn't any real, what's this or what's that. So we get up around the Elohim, and I'm no longer, I don't want to get into the religious thing, but I don't practice that way anymore. But the Elohim came into my NDE, and Jordan Maxwell, a week before my NDE, was teaching about the Elohim, and it was plural for gods. And so that's what I saw. I saw that in the outer edges of the universe. And the Elohim itself looked like a witch's wand. It was very silvery light, okay, and off the end had tentacles, lights, where the sparkles at the end, and the Elohim would cast across the skies these numbers, these formulas, these algebraic formulas. Physics and all things. He was showing me how everything is, and Saturn to Jupiter, from Jupiter to Earth, there were numbers that were constantly changing and moving. It was the dynamics and the pressure and everything involved in the heavens, and including us, the human life, whether we took a breath or we moved, or me speaking or you speaking, or everything was energy.